Imagine moving into a house and discovering a room that isn't supposed to exist. A room that was never built, yet cries for help echo from behind its walls. Blueprints never lie, or do they? This house had a secret room, hidden for decades. No doors, no windows, but the screams, they were real. What if the home you thought was safe was hiding something darker? Tonight you'll step into the house and hear the voices coming from the room that was never built. Rain lashed against the old house as Daniel Mercer slid a heavy box of papers across the attic floor. The smell of dust and mildew clung to the air, making him cough as he pulled open the cracked leather lid. Inside were rolled-up architectural blueprints yellowed with age, their edges curling like dead leaves. Daniel had inherited the house from his late uncle, a man who had lived here alone for nearly 40 years. He had planned to renovate, sell quickly, and move on, until the strange discovery. One blueprint caught his attention because it was newer than the others. The title in faded ink read, "Revised Floor Plan, Mercer Residence." He unrolled it carefully, flattening the fragile sheet against the wooden floor. His eyes followed the precise black lines of walls, doors, and staircases. Everything looked as expected, until he noticed something impossible. On the second floor layout, between the master bedroom and the guest room, there was another square, a perfectly drawn room. A room with no door, no window, no way to enter or exit. Daniel frowned and traced his finger across the blueprint again. Yes, there it was. 4 walls, all enclosed, like a secret box. He glanced around the attic, heart quickening. He had walked through the house earlier. He knew its layout by memory already. But there was no such room. The blueprint suggested it should exist, yet in reality, it didn't. He laughed nervously, telling himself it was probably an error. Architects made mistakes all the time, didn't they? Still, he couldn't shake the unease crawling down his spine. Why would anyone draw a room that wasn't there? A sudden gust of wind rattled the attic window, startling him. The house moaned as if shifting under the storm's weight. Daniel rolled the blueprint back and tucked it under his arm. He told himself it was nothing but curiosity, yet he carried it downstairs. The second-floor hallway stretched long and silent as he approached the spot marked on the paper. His footsteps echoed faintly against the wooden planks. He stopped between the 2 bedrooms, staring at the plain, painted wall. According to the blueprint, behind that wall should be a room. He pressed his palm flat against the cold plaster. Solid, smooth, nothing unusual. He knocked. The hollow thump reverberated strangely, deeper than he expected. It sounded less like plaster and more like emptiness. A shiver slid through him. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the wall. At first, there was only silence, then faint, muffled, a sound. Daniel froze, holding his breath. The sound came again, clearer this time. A voice. No, it was several voices. Whispers. Urgent, trembling whispers, as if dozens of people were murmuring at once. His heart hammered in his chest as sweat dampened his palms. He jerked back from the wall, stumbling into the opposite doorframe. No, that's not possible, he muttered aloud, voice shaking. Whispers couldn't come from solid walls, not unless someone was inside. The storm rumbled outside, thunder cracking in the distance. Daniel forced himself to lean close again. This time, instead of whispers, he heard a long, dragging moan, like someone in pain. He swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to run, but curiosity rooted him in place. "Hello?" he whispered, barely audible. Instantly, the moan stopped. Silence swallowed the hall. Daniel's skin prickled as if invisible eyes watched him from the other side. Then, 3 sharp knocks came from inside the wall. His breath caught in his throat. The knocks were deliberate, precise, human. He stumbled backward until his back hit the banister of the staircase. The blueprint slipped from his hand and fluttered to the floor. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the paper for a split second. Daniel stared at the black square, the room that didn't exist, outlined on the floor plan. From behind the wall, a scream erupted. Not faint, not distant. A raw, blood-curdling scream of agony. Daniel clapped his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The sound tore through him like knives. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the scream stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. His chest heaved as he gasped for air, legs trembling beneath him. "This isn't real," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "I'm imagining things. Just the storm, just..." A soft voice interrupted him. It came from directly behind the wall. A child's voice. Fragile, broken, desperate. "Help me." Daniel's blood ran cold. His body refused to move, paralyzed by terror. "Help me," the voice repeated, weaker now. He forced himself to bend down and grab the blueprint again. His hands shook as he traced the walls on the paper. No door, no entrance, no escape. But the voice. It was real. Daniel backed away, heart pounding, until he reached the staircase. He turned and fled down the steps, leaving the whispers and the blueprint behind. Yet as he reached the bottom floor, he could still hear it faintly. That small, broken cry seeping through the walls. "Help me." Daniel barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to hide a whisper. He lay awake on the living room couch, unable to return upstairs. The memory of that scream gnawed at his mind. And worse, the fragile voice that had begged him for help. Morning came slowly, with pale light spilling across dusty windows. Daniel sat up, rubbing his burning eyes. He told himself it had been a dream, a trick of the storm. But deep down, he knew it hadn't. He glanced toward the staircase, his chest tightening. The blueprint still lay where he had dropped it last night. He picked it up again, staring at the impossible room. He needed answers, and there was only one place to start: his uncle's study. The room smelled of stale smoke and old paper. Books lined the shelves, their spines cracked and faded. The desk was covered in letters, receipts, and scribbled notes. Daniel opened drawer after drawer, searching for anything unusual. Most of it was mundane: bills, tax forms, old photographs. But then he found a leather-bound journal. His uncle's handwriting filled the yellowed pages, messy and frantic. Daniel skimmed through the entries, his pulse quickening as he read. The first pages spoke of routine days, meals, repairs, loneliness. But then, the tone changed. His uncle began writing about the extra room. Daniel froze, eyes wide. The words were shaky, hurried. "I hear them again tonight. The walls won't stay quiet." Another entry. "There is no door, but I know someone is inside. They beg for release." Daniel's skin prickled. His uncle had heard the same voices. He turned the page, heart racing. "I tried to ignore them, but the screams are worse. The child, always the child." Why does it sound like her? Daniel's breath caught. Her? Who was his uncle talking about? He flipped to the last entry, scrawled in a frantic hand. "The house remembers. The room was never built, but it is always there. I cannot sleep. They are watching me through the walls." The ink trailed off, blotched and uneven. Daniel shut the journal with trembling hands. His uncle hadn't been imagining things. The voices were real. A chill swept through the room, though no window was open. Daniel rubbed his arms, suddenly cold. He decided to check the county archives. If there had been any renovations, the records might explain the blueprint. That afternoon, he drove into town, the journal and blueprint tucked safely into his bag. The archive building was quiet, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. A middle-aged clerk led him to a long table stacked with dusty files. Daniel flipped through property records, deeds, and floor plans. Hours passed as he scoured through decades of history. Finally, he found something unusual: a building permit from 1952, filed by the original owner of the house. The documents showed a proposed renovation, an additional room upstairs. But stamped across the papers in red ink were the words, "Permit denied." Daniel frowned. The notes in the margin read, "Unsafe design. Room must not be built. Structural concerns unresolved." Yet the blueprint in his hand clearly showed the room had been drawn, but not built. At least, not in the physical sense. Daniel's pulse quickened as he pieced it together. The house was never supposed to have that room. Yet somehow it existed, in whispers, in screams, in the walls themselves. He shivered at the thought. The clerk glanced over at him. "Find what you're looking for?" she asked casually. Daniel hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Kind of," he muttered. "This house, it has a strange history." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Daniel folded the blueprint quickly. "Just old designs." He thanked her and left, but the unease followed him. Driving back through the quiet countryside, the house loomed in his thoughts. What had the original owner tried to build? Why was the room forbidden? And most importantly, what was inside now? By the time he pulled into the driveway, dusk had already settled. The house stood in silhouette, dark against the fading sky. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, reluctant to go inside, but he couldn't avoid it forever. Steeling himself, he stepped through the creaking front door. The air felt heavier than before, as if the house itself had been waiting for him. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under his weight. The hallway stretched before him, quiet and still. He approached the wall again. For a long moment, nothing happened, just silence. He almost turned away. When the whisper returned, "Daniel." His heart stopped. It had said his name. He stumbled back, eyes wide. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Silence. Then a long, slow scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the inside of the wall. "Let me out," the voice groaned. Daniel clutched the journal tightly, as if it could shield him. "You're not real," he whispered desperately. The wall shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling as if something had struck it from the other side. Then came another scream, louder, longer, more agonized than before. Daniel stumbled backward into the master bedroom, slamming the door shut. His chest heaved as sweat trickled down his forehead. He clutched the journal, the blueprint crumpled in his fist. The house shook with the force of the unseen cries. He pressed his hands against his ears, but it was useless. The screams were inside him now, clawing at his mind. And then, silence. He collapsed onto the bed, trembling. When he finally dared to open his eyes, he noticed something horrifying. The wall inside the bedroom had changed. A crack had appeared in the plaster, thin but deep. And from the darkness within the crack, something moved. Daniel could not tear his eyes away from the crack. It split the plaster like a jagged wound, running downward in an uneven line. A faint draft of cold air seeped out, smelling of rot and damp stone. His breath quickened as he stumbled backward toward the door. But something inside him refused to look away. He felt that if he turned his back, the thing in the wall would come fully out. The shadows in the crack shifted unnaturally, as though something writhed behind them. Then, a pale fingertip pressed through. Daniel's stomach lurched as the thin gray finger clawed at the plaster, scraping dust onto the floor. He bolted from the room, slamming the door shut behind him. His hand shook violently on the knob, holding it as though something might burst out any second. But the door remained still. Silence pressed down on the house, heavy and suffocating. Daniel staggered down the hall, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He fled downstairs, collapsing into a chair in the study. The journal still lay on the desk, its leather cover cracked open. He grabbed it and flipped desperately through the pages. He needed answers, anything that would explain what he had just seen. One passage caught his eye. The walls bleed when I try to ignore them. If I seal the crack, it always returns. It wants to come through. Daniel's chest tightened. His uncle had seen it too. His uncle had tried to stop it and failed. A sudden pounding sound rattled the ceiling above him. 3 heavy thuds, deliberate and slow. Dust drifted from the rafters onto the desk. The sound came again, louder this time. Daniel forced himself up, his legs trembling. Step by step, he climbed the staircase again, dread curling in his gut. The hallway stretched long and dim, shadows gathering in the corners. He reached the master bedroom door, his hand hovering over the knob. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a faint whisper seeped through the door. Daniel. His hand froze mid-air. Daniel. Let me out. He jerked his hand back, breathing hard. No, he whispered. You're not real. The whisper turned into a low, guttural growl. The door rattled violently as though something inside had slammed against it. Daniel stumbled back. The walls around him groaned, cracking faintly as if under immense pressure. Get out of my house, he shouted, his voice breaking. For a brief moment, silence fell. He almost believed it was over. Then the entire hallway shuddered as a deafening scream ripped through the walls. Plaster rained from the ceiling as the cracks widened. The blueprint slipped from his hand, fluttering to the floor again. And to his horror, he saw that the black square had changed. The lines were thicker now, darker, as though the room was forcing itself more firmly into existence. His chest tightened as panic clawed at his throat. He scooped up the blueprint, shoving it into his jacket pocket. He had to get out. Without another glance at the door, he bolted down the stairs and out the front door into the night air. The cold wind hit him like a slap, but he kept running. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the property, his lungs burning. The house loomed behind him, black against the starless sky. And though he was outside, he could still hear it, the muffled sobbing of the child. Help me. He pressed his palms against his ears, shaking his head. Leave me alone, he screamed into the darkness. But the voice only grew louder. Desperate, he pulled out his phone and dialed his friend Mark. Mark was the only person he trusted enough to believe him. The phone rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Daniel, it's midnight, what's wrong? Daniel's voice shook. You need to come to the house, please, I can't explain, just come. There was a long pause, then Mark sighed. Fine, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Daniel hung up, pacing the gravel drive, his breath visible in the cold night air. Every minute felt like an hour. When Mark's headlights finally appeared at the end of the road, relief flooded him. Mark stepped out of the car, frowning. You look like hell. What happened? Daniel grabbed his arm. You have to see it for yourself. Mark frowned but followed him toward the house. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. The hallway creaked under their steps as Daniel led him upstairs. They stopped outside the master bedroom door. It's in there, Daniel whispered. Mark gave him a skeptical look. What is? The room, the voices. Just listen. Mark sighed and pressed his ear against the wall. For a long moment there was nothing. Then faintly, the whisper returned. "Help me." Mark jerked back, eyes wide. What the hell was that? "I told you," Daniel hissed. Suddenly the door rattled violently, the knob twisting on its own. Both men stumbled backward in shock. "Jesus Christ," Mark shouted. The wall groaned, the crack widening, plaster crumbling to the floor. A pale hand shot through the gap, grasping at the air. Mark swore loudly, backing toward the hall. Daniel stood frozen, unable to move. The hand clawed desperately, fingers bending at unnatural angles. "Let me out," the voice cried again, louder now, almost shrieking. Daniel snapped out of his daze and grabbed Mark's arm. "We have to go, now." They bolted down the stairs as the house shook violently behind them. The front door slammed shut on its own as they ran through it. Outside, both men doubled over, gasping for breath. Mark's face was pale. "What the hell is in your house, Daniel?" Daniel pulled the blueprint from his pocket, shoving it into Mark's hands. "The room. It was never built, but it's there." Mark stared at the paper, his jaw tightening. "Then whatever's inside, it's not supposed to exist." The house moaned loudly behind them, as though agreeing, and from within the walls came one final scream, long, drawn out, and full of rage. The scream lingered in the night air, echoing across the empty fields. Daniel and Mark stood frozen, neither daring to move closer to the house. The windows rattled violently, as though the whole building was alive. Then slowly the noise died down. The house fell silent again, looming in the darkness like a waiting predator. Mark wiped sweat from his brow, his voice shaking. "We can't stay here. Burn it down. Demolish it. Whatever that is, it's not human." Daniel shook his head, gripping the blueprint tightly. "No. If we destroy the house without understanding, whatever's in there might not stay buried." Mark glared at him, frustrated. "And you want to understand it? Are you insane?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I need to know what it wants, why it's here." Silence hung between them, broken only by the soft whistle of the wind. Finally, Mark sighed heavily. "Fine, but if anything happens, I'm dragging you out." Together, they stepped cautiously back inside. The air was colder than before, thick and oppressive. The floor groaned under their weight as they ascended the stairs once more. The master bedroom door stood ajar now, swinging faintly. Daniel's stomach dropped. He was certain he had closed it. A sickly smell of damp earth and decay seeped from inside. Mark covered his nose with his sleeve. "God, it stinks like a grave." Daniel pushed the door open slowly. The crack in the wall had widened into a gaping wound. Plaster and wood splintered outward, revealing a hollow space beyond. A darkness deeper than shadow stretched inside, swallowing the light from their phones. Daniel raised his flashlight, his hand trembling. The beam pierced the blackness, illuminating the interior. What he saw froze his blood. It was a room, perfectly square, exactly as the blueprint had drawn it. Dust and cobwebs coated the corners, but the space was undeniably real. Yet no windows, no doors, sealed from the world except for the crack they had opened. Mark muttered a curse under his breath. "This isn't possible." Daniel stepped closer, ignoring the weight of dread pressing on his chest. He aimed the light deeper into the room. Something moved. A figure crouched in the farthest corner, its back to them. The outline was small, childlike. "Oh my God," Daniel whispered. The figure shifted, bones cracking audibly as it turned. Slowly, it faced them. A little girl's face stared back. pale, sunken eyes glistened in the dark. Her lips were torn, her skin gray and sagging like wet paper, and yet her voice was soft, fragile. "Help me." Daniel's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head, bones creaking unnaturally. "They built me here and left me inside." Mark grabbed Daniel's arm, whispering harshly, "We need to go, now." But Daniel couldn't move. His body trembled, rooted to the spot. The girl's eyes flicked down to the blueprint in his hand. Her voice grew louder. "You brought me back." The paper in Daniel's grasp grew hot, edges curling as if burning. He yelped and dropped it to the floor. The blueprint smoldered, black lines glowing red like veins. The square in the center pulsed as though alive. The girl rose slowly, her movements stiff and jerky like a puppet on broken strings. Her shadow stretched across the floor, growing larger, darker, spreading up the walls. Mark backed toward the hall, panic on his face. "Daniel, for God's sake, run!" the girl screamed. A shrill, piercing sound that shattered the glass of the bedroom window. The walls trembled, cracking open as unseen hands clawed their way out. Dozens of pale, withered arms burst through the plaster, reaching, grasping. Daniel stumbled backward, narrowly dodging their clutching fingers. Mark grabbed his shoulder and dragged him toward the hall. They sprinted down the stairs as the house groaned like a dying beast. The whispers swelled, overlapping, filling every corner. "Help me. Let me out. Stay with us." The voices screamed in unison, shaking the very foundations. Daniel and Mark crashed through the front door, tumbling into the night. Behind them, the house convulsed violently, walls splitting, windows exploding outward. A sickening roar echoed across the field as if the entire building were alive. Daniel scrambled to his feet, pulling Mark with him. Together they ran until the house was a shrinking shadow against the horizon. When they finally stopped, gasping for breath, the night was eerily silent. Daniel looked back. The house stood still, as if nothing had happened. But he knew better. The room was awake now. Mark shook his head in disbelief. "We can't ever go back there." Daniel stared at the horizon, his face pale. "It won't matter. The room is part of the house, and the house..." He trailed off, dread curling in his gut. "The house is part of me now." Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel opened his hand. Burn marks streaked across his palm, the same shape as the black square on the blueprint. The lines glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. His voice was barely a whisper. "It won't let me go." From far behind them, carried faintly on the wind, came the child's voice one last time. "Daniel." He froze, his body trembling. Mark grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the car. "We're leaving. Now." They sped away down the dark road, headlights cutting through the night. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the voice followed them, that the room, once awakened, would never truly rest again. And deep inside he knew, one day the house would call him back. The house may still stand, silent and waiting, but the room that was never built is awake now. And once you've heard its cries, you can never truly escape them. If you enjoyed this story and want more nightmares just like it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe to Nightmare, because the next story might be waiting for you.